So I start this video off with a still image, and it begins from the deep, even in the womb. From the deep, even in the womb, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, it's a famous quote, from Exodus or whatever. Like, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. That's very different than being evil. That's very different than being evil. And Moses is such a pivotal figure in the story of theology, in the story of his story, If history isn't his story, Moses's story, then whose story is it, right? Well, history comes before and history has come after. But we really can't talk about anything without talking about Moses. So, there's that. Anyway. And who was Moses opposed to? Pharaoh. But yet, Moses was in the lineage of Pharaoh. Right. Jesus was Joseph's adopted son. Moses was Pharaoh's adopted son. And there's an inversion here. If God hardened Pharaoh's heart, then it stands to reason on either side of the BC, AD, or BC, BCE, or no, BCE, CE. This is one of the funny things I think about, because it used to be AD. Well, it used to be BC AD, before Christ, after death, until you learn that it's actually Latin and it's, BC, whatever that is, and AD, Anno Domini, Annum Dominum, whatever the Latin way of talking about it is. But then they changed it to BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, the Common Era. But because they made it into because they made it into just like the first letter of the word, and because it's BCE and CE, you could say before the Christian era and the Christian era. So, but even in the womb, I guess what I'm saying is that, before you were, I am. It is said, it has been said, that God said that. Before you were, I am. So, before Pharaoh was, God was. And God hardened Pharaoh's heart. God hardened Pharaoh's heart before Pharaoh even was. And what kind of God would condemn? Because we know how much Christ suffered, but we don't know how much Pharaoh suffered. And I'm not trying to, this might seem like I'm trying to create an opposition, or that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing with it and dealing with it head on. What do I mean? I mean that I am failed. I am flawed. I am so flawed that I very much hope to go to heaven, but I don't have any faith or expectation that I'll go to heaven. I'm a horrible person. Horrible. I feel like I'm a liability, not a asset. you know, to not only my local community, my nation, you know, you know. I barely have a religion. It's just this, for me, religion is just this flickering flame in my mind. I don't go anywhere. I don't gather with anybody. I don't do anything. I barely donate. I do donate like I'd say I donate like 19 out of 20 times, or actually maybe even more, like maybe like 38 or 39 times out of 40 when I'm at the grocery store, whether I'm buying like $7 of stuff or if I'm buying $70 worth of stuff. And usually I buy somewhere in between there. But either way, I'm going to donate $2 most of the time to their charity because I'm at the store. The store I shop at a lot is Shaw's. I shop at like 30 or 40 different grocery stores because I travel a lot for work, so I go by a lot of grocery stores. So therefore I shop at a lot of grocery stores because mostly I buy my supper on the way home. I usually buy my lunch on the way to work and I buy my supper on the way home. I typically don't eat breakfast except for coffee and cigarettes and water with lime. At least I do the water with lime. Can you give me some credit for that? But anyway, what I was going to say about this image is, so there's clearly more or less a face in the middle of this, like square directly in the middle of this image. There's a kind of face. And there's all these stacked harmonics. There's a totem pole of faces. It's in one way like anatomical. It's in one way a description of a body. It's in one way a description of harmonic. Well, there's a circularity to it. These outward rings of harmonics. There's also a vertical harmonic series of threads. The vertical, well, there's a horizontal series of semi-pseudo uniform threads. And then vertically, there is also a kind of harmonic uniformity because there is a kind of upward, downward directionality to the image. But it's more subtle and it's very human. It's very human. We interact with horizon lines. We interact with the horizontal very differently than we interact with the vertical. The ground, the tree. The floor is the ground. The floor is the dirt. The floor. One of my favorite things about Abraham Lincoln is that when he had a law office, before he, I think even before he went to Congress, Abraham Lincoln, his law office was so dirty that plants would grow from the dirt between the floorboards of his office. One of the greatest, if not the greatest presidents of the most powerful nation ever. Like, the most circumstantial leader of all time, arguably. Or at least in a handful, a small handful. He practiced law in an office. He was so focused on the law that he didn't give a fuck that plants were growing between the floorboards of his office. That is gangster, so to speak. But it is gangster. It's a different type of suffering than other types of suffering. But it is a type of suffering. It's a it's a funny thing, man. Because his suffering, well, he certainly suffered physically, but his suffering was a suffering of intellect. His suffering, Abraham Lincoln's suffering, was a suffering of intelligence. I heard yesterday, that the penny is going to stop being made. I actually don't agree with that, but maybe I'm just too old. But I think us seeing Abraham Lincoln every day, we 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 step over Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, I'm not sure what I was going to say there, but I got cut off because of technical difficulties. So I'm not going to pick up where I left off. I'm going to talk about what I wanted to talk about in the first place, which is that the face in this image, I wasn't looking for a face. I wasn't trying to build a face. I didn't have this face in my mind, and like I found some kind of clever way to construct this face. I was constructing Archimedes spirals using the flower of life. I have other videos, like I recognize that I have like 1,000 videos. I am terrible. I am no Robinson Crusoe. I do not document everything. I document a lot. A lot. Almost all my file cabinets and records are filled with folders full of things that have everything to do with everything that I'm thinking about and nothing to do with the real world. And so much that has to do with the real world slips beneath the cracks. But what I can say about this image is that I wasn't looking for a face. I took an Archimedes spiral. A very, 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 very simple, which I've documented before, so that's what I was saying about how I have like 1,000 videos. In like, I think maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of those videos, probably 2 of those videos of the 1,000 I've made, I describe the process by which I make these kinds of images, which are actually just Euclidean. This image is Euclidean planar geometry. There might be like 3 or 4 or 5 people who understand that, and I'd imagine 1 or 2 or 3 of them would be saying, "What?" But basically, by taking Archimedes spirals, also known as the spiral of Theodorus, also known as Pythagorean spirals, sometimes spirals like this people call Fibonaccian spirals. There are other names also. But by constructing them in a certain way, rotating them in certain ways, evaluating value being the important word there, evaluating them, light and dark, coloring them, literally, color, overlapping them in a variety of ways. Ugh. And then feeding the final frame, the final straw, through a cyclic hue. Cyclic, a circular hue, continuum filter. The whole process teases out layers upon layers upon layers upon layers, and it's all mathematical. It's all geometrical. Because you can see what kind of looks like a face, and actually nested faces, and actually totem pole faces, like faces and faces and faces and structures and bones and skulls, all these things, right? But that's not what I was trying to build, because also what you can see in this picture is lines of harmony, circles of harmony, diagonalities of harmony. There's harmonies built in on top of harmonies, there's structures, and it's all cohesive. It all works together. It's all the same thing. All language, all biology, all chemistry, all thought, all imagination, all love, all hate, everything comes out of this same structure. Structured eternity, structured temporality, and structured atemporality. Some things are outside of time. Demons are outside of time. That's why they seduce us, because we are not, most of us, are not outside of time. But there are those who are not only atemporal, but eternal. That's what we want. The moment we submerge into atemporality, or ascend to atemporality, we must resist the temptation to be seduced, because the seduction will take us away from eternity. Atemporality, being outside of time, being greater than the constriction of time, will ultimately damn us if we do not seek the eternal. The eternal is the time outside of all times. It's the atemporality of atemporality. You can live in multiple times and be atemporal, and yet then at the end of times extinguish. Our goal is that the end of times we become time eternal, where everything is true, everything is transparent. Heaven holds two kinds of souls. Let me say that again. Heaven holds two kinds of souls. The good and the bad. There are bad souls in the heaven of heavens, and there are good souls in the heaven of heavens. Let me give you the simplest example that I can give. The little flower, Saint Therese. The little flower, Saint Therese, is the soft nougat of heaven. She is what is to be protected. Saint Christopher is the protector. He is the boundary. Without Saint Christopher, Saint Therese would be dead. And without Saint Therese, Saint Christopher would have nothing to protect. A badass butcher motherfucker like Saint Christopher, or Saint Paul, or Saint Nicholas for that reason, if they don't have something to protect, they're of no use. They're not going to be good. They're not the little flower. They're the big boat. St. Christopher needs the little flower. The dog-headed saint needs the little flower. Because without the little flower, the dog-headed saint has nothing to live for. The dog-headed saint is the perimeter of heaven, the heaven of heavens, in the warring in heavenly realms. Without the little flower, the dog-headed saint has nothing to fight for. And without the dog-headed saint, that son of a fucking bitch, that bastard, without him, the little flower is torn to shreds. The little flower is fucked. The little flower is Saint Agnes without a story. Saint Agnes suffered. The little flower suffered in a different way, but they both suffered. Without their story, their suffering would have been for nothing. But they left their story, as did Virginia Woolf, as did Emily Dickinson. And who are the other St. Christophers? Was General Grant a St. Christopher? You can argue it one way or you can argue it another, but when he went out of this world, he took a kind of evil with him. Was he a son of a bitch, motherfucker, damned for hell? Maybe he was. How brave would you have to be to condemn yourself to hell, so long as you could take some motherfuckers who deserve to be there with you? That is... that's